This is the Total Perspective Vortex. I'm Tragula,
And I'm Christian.
and it's June 25th, 2020. The
Well,
craziness continues, Christian.
yes, it does. Yes, it does. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I did get some ideas about like a positive viewpoint. There's some uh, Razorfist, if you watch him, made me feel a little bit better yesterday. He put out a video called Keeping the Chaos in Perspective.
To be fair, he always makes me feel better.
Yeah. But he did point out that someone who calls himself the rageaholic, telling people to chill out
Right.
is, is sort of soothing. It's a good video. I recommend you watch it. Uh, but the thing is, like he sort of made this argument that the neo-Marxists have overplayed their hands. They're using these tactics to make their numbers look larger than they appear. Right? They just have a
Right.
few agitators in these crowds that are riling people up and creating this mob mentality. So, yes, they are engineering things, steering things in a certain direction. Uh, so he's like, so don't feel like it's as bad as things are. But my concern on that is, yeah, just because they failed in the past doesn't mean they're going to fail this time. And uh, like Tim Pool has a very somber take, and Dave Rubin also had an interesting take, but he brought his take through the pretty Venezuelan woman. So I think this is the one I chose for the podcast over Tim Pool. Sorry, Tim. We all know what you're hiding
I'm
under that
see-
beanie.
yeah, I'm seeing a thumbnail. This might be yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So Uh, so she just tends to be a little bit more convincing than Tim Pool, and she's pointing out that this whole thing, like the tearing down of statues. What else does she bring up? The not being allowed to say certain words, the banning of movies. These are all things that happen in Venezuela as socialism
Right.
was taking over, and this is basically like my concern here is Razorfist is just like, relax, we're strong, we're powerful. This has been tried before and failed, but these tactics have been successful in other places at other times as well. And I think of the the situation reminds me of of ancient Rome and Caesar crossing the Rubicon. Like Sargon made the point that, like, oh, he's feeling more confident because it feels like the Marxists are making their desperate push before Trump's possible reelection. They're putting all their cards on the table, and
Right.
and I think he's right that this is an all cards on the table desperate push, but like crossing the Rubicon, uh, that sometimes desperate pushes work, right? So
Right.
there's this, like, and in that attitude, like, Caesar was severely outnumbered, and the fact that he pushed his way all the way to Rome and met no opposition because he moved so quickly, and people were so, and the the rest of the Roman Republic was so unprepared for his desperate maneuver, and it's unexpected, and that's my concern here is, yes, okay, the communists are clearly making out they're out of the trenches, they're making their desperate push, but what's the opposition that they're facing? Like, when our leaders are kneeling, where's the opposition? When's the opposition coming? When's the cavalry coming over the hill?
Well, if I can, if I the way that this seems different to me, and I there's a bunch of I like what Razor Fist has. It's like trade your black pills for chill pills.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of liking his perspective. Michael Malice talks a lot about this as well. Uh, it is important to place it within a historical context that it's been tried and it has failed in the democracies, right?
Well,
Um,
in America, it's been tried
in
and failed.
America
And
specifically,
When America has been stronger and less
right?
demoralized, but it's
That's
like
true.
Venezuela was a democracy, Like that, back to our pretty girl example, right? And
Right.
they thought that it couldn't happen here. We love freedom too much, right? It's just they just want to socialize some things. It's not going to be so bad, and then it was
So,
really bad.
but to finish my point, the those leaders are now. It'll be interesting to see who gets elected. Um, but these leaders have kind of exposed themselves, so it'll be interesting to see what the people's reaction is, because it's either a situation where they're going to follow those leaders, or it'll be a situation where they really reject it, because defunding the police is a pretty tough sell to, I think, to the average person, right? Like, this if the state has to do one thing, it's protect its citizens. People will tolerate a lot of stuff if they're safe, but now they're not doing their jobs. There's a bunch of stuff that you have to tolerate, plus you're not safe, or they want to make it unsafe. I'm interested to see what will happen to these politicians. I think if a lot of these kneeling politicians get reelected, that'll be a cause for concern. But at this stage, it's like, now they've shown their cards in a very blatant way. So now it'll be interesting to see how the public reacts. I'm not ready to make a decision either way
Well, I'm not.
until I see the
I
next elections
I
in a lot
think
of
that
these places.
the reason we're doing the total perspective vortex is that we're trying uh, to come up with some opposition here.
Right.
And I'm trying to help build the ideas that we can use to stand against this, because
Right.
that's one of the reasons our leaders are demoralized, that they're paralyzed by language, that we've let the postmodernists play these language games, these demoralization games. And I haven't prepared a lot of slides for this, so I might put one up in post. But Liberty Hound has been doing some excellent videos
Really?
on,
Okay.
like, going over demoralization, communist demoralization tactics. Veeh has also made some excellent videos. I'll definitely put links in the descriptions to these, because I think that they're things that everyone should watch. But it's all about how they control language. Especially the postmodernists have refined this to an art, where they control language, and and take away our ability to put forth a moral response, right? So our leaders, like, if you see that all the, like, the conservative leaders' responses, who would normally be in a well-oriented society, would be the guardians of wisdom, like the ones who are arguing for the why of why we do these things, right? They're all tepid and paralyzed because they've lost their moral strength and moral force, and this has been a specific attack on the way we think about things. So Sargon Carl Benjamin put up this thing on Parler, and if you haven't joined Parler yet, I recommend that you go out and do that. There's a push to put it out as the Twitter alternative, and we're going to need
Right.
something like that in this election cycle.
You cannot have a neutral communication with a postmodernist. When they talk to you, the very structure of the language they use is cleverly designed to alter your worldview. It is a power game to force you into submission to their anti-liberal moral system, which is which opens the gate to actual discrimination based on racial, gendered, etc. lines. This is why California just repealed their anti-discrimination laws. So that's news to me.
Oh, I didn't know that was news to you. This is, yeah. So they 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 had put forth a bill. California put forth a bill called the, I don't know, Inclusive Hiring Amendment or something, and the title made it suggest like they were just amending the legislation, but the actual contents of the bill was just abolishing the legislation.
Okay.
So now you're again, it's the rule of the mob, right? We're done with this whole treating people equally thing.
So if you could continue on that, just to clarify, so it removes, it would have just removed it. Is that it? And sorry, what's been repealed? Just repealed their anti-discrimination laws. So this
In
new bill
so
was
hiring,
introduced.
so in hiring
So
practices,
now you
basically.
can hire based on race.
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
oh, California, uh, you're uh, you're what we have to be careful. You're a warning to the rest of the world in a lot of ways.
Yeah, well, they say that they're 5 years ahead of us in a lot of
Yeah,
ways, right? And
you know what? That's
that's
probably right.
I think it's I think the event horizon is much shorter now that they're much closer to where we are. Certainly, I would expect similar things to happen in Canada as well.
Well, yes. Well, the whole what is it? Eric Metaxas talks about the UK is about 10 years ahead. He finds Canada about 5, and then there's the US. So he's like he likes to go to the UK to see. It's like a warning, and then yeah, you do Canada and then the US. So actually, I think that was Ezra Levant. So in
Mm-hmm.
their conversation together. So so yes, California in some sense is behind the UK and Canada as well, or it's
So
probably about in line with Canada.
yeah, so I'm going to steer the conversation away from how bad things are and back to like what we can actually do about it,
Always the
right?
optimist. Always the
Oh yeah,
optimist.
you know me and my optimism. But yeah, so let's look at that, like how the postmodernists attack language. So they change language in a certain way. So you have to understand when you're engaged in someone who's permeated in modernist a postmodernist, they are looking at everything as a power struggle, a linguistic power struggle. So they're
Right.
going to be trying shaping words in certain ways that suit them and suit their ideology. And I put this reference here to Peter Jackson's interpretation of communication with the postmodernists, and it's Pippin and the Palantir. So if anyone knows their Lord of the Rings, the Palantir was a device that allowed you to communicate with people far away, like sort of like do like a set up a telepathic link with them, and they were a powerful tool for uniting the empire of man in a past golden age. But since then, like the stones disappeared, and it's discovered that Sauron, the Lord of Lies and Deception, like the Eye in the Lord of the Rings, the Lord of the Ring, has one of the Palantirs. And so when anyone else uses another Palantir, they're in direct communication with Sauron. And Sauron like twists their minds and rips things out of them. So it was sort of like having that conversation with a postmodernist is
So
like
like
that.
a pre-tech like Facebook of some kind.
Yeah, like social media.
Social media.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Tolkien like and this is like um and this is how like we've talked about before, the moral of the stories, like powerful stories. And I think Tolkien was a master of this, is finding that
Mm-hmm.
meaning, finding those things that resonate with people, right? Those patterns that you can pull out of it. And that there's a, with the story of that Palantir there's a very real message or meaning about life that you can get of like if you're talking to the devil, you're talking to someone who's engaged in this naked power struggle and using language against you. They can warp your minds in certain ways. So you have to actually have a very strong foundation to be defending from. So let's talk about that some more, right? And how these words have been taken away from us. Now, one thing, like my friends used to encourage me in like the late 2000s to start watching The Daily Show, and I liked most of it. I thought it pretty funny. But one thing that really struck me was always off chord was they would introduce this whole thing of like having a black friend was not a defense to racism. Like they'd ridicule that idea,
Right.
right? And I think it was Stephen Colbert had like this whole shtick about that, and it would be like everyone's supposed to laugh. Oh, someone thinks they're not a racist because they have a black friend.
Intuitively, it's a ludicrous statement. But I have a black friend. Yeah, intuitively that makes a lot of sense. It's
Yeah.
like, dude,
And this is what you're getting at there, is that sort of the substructure of the Western civilization, is that in order to participate in the civilization, like in order to participate in the society, you have to have you have to know how to participate in the society, have an intuitive
right,
sense of the society. Just like, knowing how to do carpentry doesn't mean like the whys of how to do it, why you're doing things this way, but if you're skilled at it, you just do it that way. So people had the
correct.
right answer of like, yeah, well, wait, I have a black friend, I can't be racist. Because what it
Right.
actually is, and what I'm coming back to, is like we have to get away from these ridiculous academic word twisting postmodernist definitions of what racism is that will never that are abstract concepts that are used to tear us apart and never really solve the problem, to actually like what racism actually is. And what racism it actually is much more manageable. It's one form of tribalism, and tribalism
Right.
is a part of human nature. So all racism is tribalism along racial lines. It's racial tribalism. Okay, and there's other
Right.
forms of tribalism. Like I've talked about how nationalism is tribalism along nation lines. But you can also
Right.
have you have tribalism in team sports is all about tribalism as well, right? So you have tribalism along the lines of sports teams, right? So tribalism is an innate part of human nature.
Right.
Um, and with that, so that why that is such a good defense of like, I have a black friend, or I have I have black family, or people on my sports team are black. It's showing that you're not drawing your tribal lines along racial points, and that's
Right.
exactly that is a negation of being a racist, is drawing
Right.
your tribal lines along other ways instead of racially. And that's what we should really be discussing, is what is the right way to draw your tribal lines. So again, we're seeing that with Black Lives Matters and All Lives Matters.
Right.
All lives matter is the correct response to Black Lives Matter, and we have that intuitive sense of it. Like that's the correct cultural, like societal response of Western civilization to the chant of Black Lives Matter. It's like, no, all lives matter, right? Because that's a fundamental humanist principle, is all lives matter, right? That we treat everyone's life is an end into itself. All lives
Right.
matter.
Yeah.
And Black Lives Matter is an invocation of that tribalism, where you're creating an in group and an out group along racial lines, right? No, our society should be concerned with black lives. Black lives need to matter. All these other lives don't matter, or matter less. And that's that tribal line invocation of in group and out group, right? So, and you could talk, and you can see some of the other responses people have talked, like white lives matter or blue lives matter, right? Those are
Right.
also sort of tribal invocations of like, no, well, if we're going to talk about lives mattering, then we're going to talk about these lives mattering, or these lives mattering too, because sometimes the postmodernists will back on us like, oh, of course all lives matter, and blah 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 blah, right? They start playing word games to try and twist it into, it's like, oh, but we should really be only concerned with Black Lives Matter. Try and use this like awkward burning house analogy, right? Which is ridiculous on the face of it, but
Sorry, you're gonna have to flesh that out. Using the burning house
oh, I
analogy.
don't. Okay, it's one of the. It's a tortured analogy that uh, some uh, postmodernists believe, or leftists use to describe why Black Lives Matter doesn't mean all lives matter. It's like, oh, Black lives are like houses in the neighborhood, and the Black lives are the houses that are on fire. So we have to be concerned about the houses that are on fire, not the houses that are not on fire.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So I don't want to try and make sense to this, because I don't think it does make sense in the way that it's not actually a good mapping. It's a really tortured mapping. So I don't want to talk about it too much, but and it's also a linguistic game that's getting you away from, like, the fact of the matter is that they're trying to break us apart along racial lines. They're trying to create racial tribalism.
So I'd actually be interested in hearing your take on why it's so tortured. I don't think that that's obvious to everyone why that's a tortured analogy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, one of the ways that it's a tortured analogy is that firstly it describes that it's people as objects and property, which is awkward. And it's also saying that there's something unique about the black, that they're on fire and in crisis in a way that other people are not, and that it's the state's responsibility, like the fire department's responsibility, to do something about it. Right, which is awkward and wrong, right? Because it's first, and houses don't have autonomy in and of themselves.
Right. So like these, yeah, okay, I see what you're saying there. So they, they can't move, they can't, change their
like
perspective on life and try to better their situation. They're um, objects without, and this might be your point, but they're objects without agency.
Yeah, and
and that's what the left does quite a bit. These radical leftist types, the postmodernists, like I don't want to universalize this to all the left, but they tend to dehumanize like that and take away agency.
To bring it back to the Palantir, like they're all affected by this postmodernist language now, right? They're trying to play the game, like trying to fix society when the linguistic tools to understand what's going on in society have been taken away from them intentionally, right? And to cause conflict in that. So, it's a problem across the left now because they're accepting this frame that is designed to be an unsolvable puzzle. So like that, and this is the correct response, and this is what I'm trying to ground, is like, no, we have to actually start looking at this as a problem of not even the problem of tribalism per se, because I think tribalism is part of the human condition. We're not going to get rid of it. We have to actually think about like tribalism properly, like the John Lennon's Imagine, where there's no tribalism, there's no religion, no race, no countries, no yada yada yada. That's just a path towards deception too, because you can't achieve that, and attempting to achieve that would be unhealthy. So we have to get away from sort of that thinking and start, okay, well, what is the optimal way to set up our tribes? And I think it's something along the lines of family, friends, community, country. Something along those lines is how we should really be building our basic tribes, as our well-oriented tribalism.
That's a good tattoo, by the way.
What?
just that slogan. You had that across your back.
Yeah, no? Family, okay. Friends, community, country.
Yeah, something like that,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't get invited to dinner parties. I don't know why.
But so, and then there's other forms of tribalism that we have to pay attention to that, will exist regardless, but we need to make sure that, they're kept benign or kept in check. So, like, I think career tribalism is something we definitely don't talk enough about, right? So
what does that mean?
People protecting their careers, like like teachers unions or police or even within like the gilding of society, HR departments, right? You have tribes within large corporations. You have tribalism within professions, and that can be healthy, but that can get disruptive if we don't pay attention to it, right? And it isn't well oriented in the sense of like, is my my tribal loyalties to like my profession usurping my loyalty to the community or to my country, right? In the sense of like, am I doing damage to is what I'm asking for my tribal community going to damage the fabric of society, right? We're not keeping things in check in that way. So another uncomfortable consequence of framing things this way, racial tribalism is racism. That we have to look at the fact that that black people in America are more racist than white people. That's a consequence of this way of thinking, and I think that there's good historical reasons for that. Like if you look at these people brought over as slaves, but often from different communities within Africa, were brought over and sort of oppressed and created as a class, as a slave class, by their race. So that's going to be their bonding experience on that part. So of course they're going to, if they're persecuted as a race, that's where they're going to start forming their tribal line along. They're going to start forming that tribal line. So that they're going to form that racial tribalism. But I think that there's some benefit to that, like that we can, if we discuss it that way, there's things that the black community can do to help themselves to recognize that, and how that could be a problem. So there's negative sides of tribalism, that you other the people outside, but there's also the as an imbalance, you see people within your tribe to you make exceptions for people in the tribe. So one aspect of tribalism is that you make exceptions in your tribe and exceptions for the law. So I wanted to bring this. Sorry. So one of the problems with tribalism is that it is how you treat your in-group as well, that you make exceptions for people in your in-group. And I think we can inspect that. So, like Candace Owens was talking about, if you recall, she was talking about how she's disgusted by the way the black community makes martyrs out of criminals, whereas she doesn't see this in other racial communities. And I think that that's because you don't have this racial tribalism to the same extent in other communities. So we'll see. I don't have the same connection to like a white person who's a criminal unless like they're in my family or something. I'm not going to make exceptions for them or excuse their behavior or cover it up. Right. And I think you see more of that within the black community to their detriment, right? They don't examine these internal problems in the same way as maybe the police department doesn't examine their own internal problems as best as they could, right? They make exceptions. That's another form of corruption that you could talk about, that in-group tribalism that can cause problems because they're not keeping each other accountable. And when we're talking about them keeping accountable, it's accountable to the laws of the society. And this is why that type of tribalism can be detrimental. So if we're talking about the troubles that the black community faces, like the Father's Day weekend that just came out, that just passed, 104 shot, 15 fatally over one weekend in Chicago. Right. And we've talked about this before, actually, but we had like another deadly weekend in Chicago that we were talking about before, where it was 18 people killed and something like 86 people shot in one weekend. Right. And so the vast majority, like 90% of those people who were shot and were shooting were black. Right.
It's black on black violence.
It's black on black violence, so it's invisible. It's in the tribe, right? It's in the racial tribe. And it's going unexpected. But of course, it's causing this agitation within the Black community, because like they're seeing like, why are we having all these problems? And it's because like they're not holding themselves accountable to the same regard, and they're not building their own meritocratic pyramid, right? They're not. And taking it in another direction is like they're not adopting the sort of the same standards of the success that other people in America are, like it to this in the same way. Like there's other communities, I think, where they're focused on they're forming their tribes along the lines of family, community, family, friends, community, country. Like they're forming it more along those lines. And within the Black community, like you have this like something that's replacing the family, because of fatherless homes, which is like the irony is not lost that this happened on Father's Day weekend.
Right.
In these fatherless homes, you have a different form of tribalism replacing the family. You have gangs, right? So you have you could call it gangism, and that's what's a huge part of this problem, is that you have these essentially warring families within the Black community, like these gangs of young men that are killing each other and killing lots of innocent bystanders in the wake of their violence. But we can't. Sorry, go ahead.
But what I find, this doesn't follow the narrative. I mean, white people want to make it about them. No, like it's the fact that this is not being discussed, and what's being discussed is that white and by white people, but white people are discussing the fact that whites are killing, Black people. Screams like a white kind of a white centrism.
Well, I think that is again a manipulation of the like I talked before about it's a way that postmodernists have twisted Christian thought. So this is not well-formed Christianity, and my big asterisk is this is not what Christianity actually teaches. But they've managed to take a surface level understanding of Christianity and twist it this way, where it's sort of like, because Christianity has this notion of being responsibility for your actions and atonement of your sins. So they've appealed to the white community to say, so there's all this suffering in the Black community, and it's a result of slavery that happened 100 years ago, or like hundreds of years ago.
Depending where you are,
depending where you are, and what's going on. So they're appealing to that good sense outside of the community of like wanting to take responsibility and make society better, to then drive it into like drive you down this rabbit hole of the sort of the disparity of the racism of low expectations, or like this whole twisted ideology that's just going to cause more conflict. And now, why does this cause more conflict? If I'm taking responsibility for your actions, right? If say you're my son, Christian, and I'm a wealthy dad who's not always there, but I want to make sure you have life, so I give you money, and then your life goes to shit.
I'm liking this scenario.
Yeah.
I'm getting some money. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, you're getting some money. You're getting some reparations from daddy because he's not always there for you.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to give you the natural tendency is that's actually going to build resentment in daddy for you, because he's taking responsibility for your life. So naturally, the things that are going wrong in your life or in your community, in the case of the Black community, are daddy's fault. Right? That's not going to fix your relationship with dad. Dad taking giving you money because he hasn't been there for you, right? And it's not going to help you develop into a fully functioning adult. Right? It's going to leave you in this state of dependency, but also so it's going to cripple you, keep you weak, keep you in this state of dependency, but also it's going to make you resentful and angry at your father. And that's, I think, that's along the lines of what's happening with the black community, is that they keep on saying, well, okay, we'll give you more reparations, score that, but it's not, they don't like the idea of, like, again, the right answer is demonized in this context of personal responsibility. But it's not, because it's not just personal responsibility. It's personal responsibility, it's family responsibility, it's community, it's friends responsibility, it's community responsibility, then it's country's responsibility, right? So it's that orientation, that the creation of the well-formed tribes, that the black community is missing.
So since tribalism, since you're saying that tribalism is inevitable, what are kind of positive ways or well-formed ways of forming tribes?
Well, that's the conversation that we should be having. This is how we break the postmodernist spell, is that we have to start inspecting about how we are forming our tribes. We have to pay attention to that. So we have to dispel this idea that forming tribes is bad, like the John Lennon Imagine bullshit. We have to get rid of that. We have to grow past that and say, we're forming tribes. How do we form our tribes well, and how do we notice, and what situations are the way are tribal formations harming us? So we have to have mature conversations about how our tribes are formed, how they're good, how are they helping, and when are they harming what we're trying to achieve. And that's the path forward. That's how we break the postmodernist spell, and that's how we actually start dealing with racism and working as a society again. And
this is where we do the
likey and subscribey stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. Make sure hit that like button, and then subscribe, and make sure to share across all social media platforms.
Yeah, if you like what we're doing, best thing you can do is
email forwards to your grandmother.
Yes, share our conversations and have those conversations.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to say that you have black friends, and don't be afraid to say that all lives matter, and don't be afraid when someone comes at you that's racist. It's like, racism is tribalism along racial lines.
All right. Bye. Great.